Nonetheless, we have to start somewhere, and as this talk is advertised as on austerity, in a sense that's the easy bit, because austerity, as far as we're concerned, is a set of policies and a set of policy programs brought in more or less, you could say in 2010 with the election of the coalition government, but before that in 2007, 2008 by the previous Labour government. And it's a set of policies that we're all very familiar with. It involves cutting public sector budgets across the board. The cuts come in various shapes and sizes. And with all public sector cuts, there's always a time lag. I remember being interviewed soon after. People said, what's going to happen? You say, well, you can't tell because it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years before cuts actually sometimes come into effect, let alone have any impact. So it's a slow burn, some of this. They didn't cut everything in one go, but they're cutting on a regular basis. And sometimes it's quite difficult to follow whether there is actually a real world impact, whether even there have been some of the cuts that they say. Sometimes they don't cut as much as they say, sometimes they cut more, sometimes they cut differently. But the key thing is that they cut the budget. Now why, we'll come on to in a minute. And the other thing, of course, is that austerity functions in an economic world. In other words, they also have kept interest rates, as you know, historically very low. These are the same people, by the way, who said you could never have low interest rates. It would be impossible and it would destroy the economy. And now virtually gone to zero interest rates. They've also been looking at the relationship between tax and wages and benefits. And this is called fiscal policy, the tax policies, and this is where they're looking to what they call alter the balance once and for all, in order, as they say, to make work pay. So the notion is that if you earn money, you pay proportionally less tax than you used to do, so you have more what's called disposable income. That's what's in your pocket after tax has been taken away, and therefore you as an individual can make more choices about what you consume. So you can consume more services, more goods, or you can save. And the idea is to increasingly push these decisions onto individuals and away from the state. So if you don't want to save, don't save, spend. That's fine. If you do want to save, that's fine as well. But these decisions are now going to be pushed to millions of individual citizens rather than in the old system where this was decided by the state. So there's a strategic shift away from the role of the state as a collective force in society towards individual choice. Now, this concept of individual choice in economics is often associated with political freedom. So the word freedom, which I'll come and discuss later, means that in many respects, you are free to make this decision. It's your decision. So freedom, which is a political concept, is often used in economics to say you are now free to spend more of what they call your own money, that's the money you've earned, as you would wish. And you take the consequences. So if you make a bad decision, then that's tax. Yeah? If you buy too many goods now and you can't pay your gas bill, that's your problem. That's your decision, and you take the consequences, which may be that you're evicted from your home. But you made that decision to be evicted by spending more on beer than on rent, and therefore you're irresponsible. So another concept within this is personal responsibility, not social responsibility, not collective. So there's a push overall in the strategy to individuals rather than the collective of the state or the collective of the local state. And that's an important, if you like, ideological, political concept, which is embedded within the economics of austerity. So although austerity is about cutting, it's also about shifting the burden of cost and risk onto families. So the burden of cost and risk of being ill. The notion was a national health service paid for by general taxation meant that we share the risk. Who knows which one of us will get ill, therefore which one of us has a risk, which one of us therefore will incur costs from health service. That's a collective, collectivisation. The notion is that that increasingly should change, and we should shift from collectivisation to individual decisions on healthcare and every other form of social activity. So it is important to understand that. Now, I was going to presage my comments by saying this isn't a talk about the European Union, because every meeting I go to, and I go to an awful lot of meetings to speak at other activities, whatever I say, like I say, it's raining, they say, oh, well, if we come out of the EU, it will rain even more. it will stop raining, or it will bloody well snow. So you can see that I'm not going to do that. Obviously, people are very free, as you have free will, to ask me questions about whether the European Union, where it fits into all of this. But this is not primarily a talk about the European Union. Is that okay? Because I don't want to be ambushed by someone who said you didn't mention the EU. Well, thank God. Okay. Now, so to go back to that model, so austerity is about simply a set of policies. But it's not just policies, there's also implementation of policies, which is very important. Politicians can talk big and say we're going to do this, we're going to cut this, we're going to shift this around. But the implementation is also very important on what happens on the ground to a NHS trust budget, to an academy school budget, to a social services budget, to the police and fire. All of these public sector. What happens in practice, what we find, of course, is that implementation varies. So a 10% cut to the police force in Surrey is not the same as a 10% cut to the police force in Northumberland. So even though it sounds the same, it's not, because when you cut from where you are today. So if you're a reasonably well-funded police force, a 10% cut is different from if you were originally, at the time of the cut, a badly funded one. So although the cuts appear to be even-handed and fair, the actual implementation depends on where any particular public sector organisation was at the time. So you could be, as I said, in surplus in a hospital in Devon, or you could be in deficit in a hospital in Manchester. And therefore it's actually the impact of what appears to be the same cut is differential. The actual implementation also varies because senior managers in the public services have choices. They don't necessarily have to cut in the same way. They can, for example, reduce the workforce, or they can keep the workforce and reduce the pay. Yeah? They can change your terms and conditions, or they can casualise you. Or they might not do any of that. They may speed up, for instance, investment in technology, or they may decide not to do things. So there may be activities, for example, I've been doing some of my researches with the police, and one of the things the West Midlands Police said to me is the first thing that went was victim support. It just went. So this has been something that was heralded as very important. In fact, the Conservative Party was very keen on victims having a voice and victim support. And the first thing that went in the budget was they didn't cut that bit of it, they got rid of it. So they said, we no longer do victim support as police in West Midlands. By doing that, there were lower levels of cut in other police activities. But another police force could do it differently. So when this actually occurs, people have a different experience, which makes it, when we come to the end of my talk, important in terms of trying to achieve some sort of movement against. Because if people's experiences are actually different, then they are not shared, then it's harder to get solidarity around common cause. So that is quite important to recognise. I mean, the other part of austerity, of course, is that it's mixed up and mingled with, I'm only talking about the public sector at the moment, I will say something about the private sector, with changes in the way in which the public sector is held accountable. So one of the key issues is Conservative governments forever don't like democracy. I mean, they really don't like democracy. And they don't like it, particularly in local government. So they've stripped local government over the years of a range of responsibilities and a range of control, finally with the academy in schools, but they did it in other areas. And by doing that, you lose accountability. For instance, the police and crime commissioners, where I live in Staffordshire, the turnout was 5%. Yeah. And the winner got 3%. And when you contrast that to the Conservatives' view of trade union balloting and democracy, it's quite stark. But the notion is that they claim this to be more democratic because they're directly elected, because it's less democratic. Because previously it was a police authority that was under the control of the local authority. And therefore, even however imperfect, and it was often, let's be honest, appallingly run, nonetheless, it was more democratic than the current system. So there's this constant lack of accountability, and we see senior managers throughout the public sector getting away with the most atrocious behaviour and not even being sacked, let alone resigned. And I'm not just talking about the police in Hillsborough, talking throughout the system. they're not sacked. Virtually nobody's ever sacked. Even head teachers who paid for their holidays in Bermuda on the school budget don't get sacked. They're allowed to resign on full pension. Yeah? So there's no accountability, and that is partly what austerity is about. So austerity, you buy into it because of the deficit or the need to cut, but under the guise of all of this, they take away democratic structures and they take away any notion of collectivism, because accountability is also about collectivism. It's about how individuals can say, we think the senior managers are getting it wrong. We think that the senior policymakers are getting it wrong, and they say, tough, we don't care what you think you're getting it wrong. We're not accountable to you. We're not accountable to the people who use the system. We're not accountable to the workers in the system, and we're not accountable to the local community. In fact, we're simply not accountable. And that's very important, because that erodes confidence in change. Because one of the purposes of momentum, one of the purposes of what's happening, is a belief that you can change things, that actually we can change things, that we're not just passive recipients of decisions by the rich and powerful, that the world isn't made up of monstrous multinationals who are destroying our lives and we are innocent victims. The notion is that we have to have a view that by acting in certain ways we can stop them and we can make changes. And the lack of accountability is designed to demoralize us and to make the fight harder. So austerity comes as primarily as an economic model, but embedded within it are political concepts of individualism and collectivism, and also democratic concepts around the loss of accountability. So in a sense, that's it. So what I want to look now is at the consequences. Now, normally when I give talks such as these, I start with what I believe to be the most single important fact of our lives, of all our lives, and of everybody's life, and that is inequality. That as socialists, as people involved in the labour movement, we have to be motivated to do what we're doing. And the greater motivator, by far, is inequality. The inequality in the world is just mind-blowing. It's almost beyond imagining. Mike and I used to go to Zimbabwe, and I went on to Malawi, which is one of the poorest countries in Africa, where I'm a professor at the university. And you actually, as you're driving through, this is 2 years ago, there are people in mud huts. They have no electricity, they have no water, they have no heat, they have nothing. And the kids there stand there with a pair of shorts, that's all they own. Yeah? I mean, literally all they own. There's no school. There was a sign to the clinic, and I said, well, at least you've got a health clinic. They said, no, we've got the sign. Because the United Nations gave us money, but the politicians stole it, and they didn't want the United Nations regulator to think we hadn't done anything, so we put the sign up and then said the road was flooded so they couldn't go and see it. Now, that's now. And then we have, the rich list was published last week in Britain. The richest people are worth 20 billion. I'm sure you're aware that the people who own Walmart in America, the Walton family, that 4 members are in the top 10. 4 members on the top 10, worth $60 billion. 60 billion, those 4 individuals. Billion. There used to be a theatre company in Britain called the 784 Theatre Company, which says 7% of the people own 84%. Now it would be not the 780, it would be the 395, because things are even worse. So inequality of income is just staggering. Inequality of wealth, what you own, is staggering. But what does that mean for your life? It means everything is unequal. Education, health, life expectancy, social life, cultural life, everything is destroyed. I mean, really destroyed. So how can we, that's got to be our starting point. That was the starting point of all the great socialists. Wasn't some theoretical view of a better world. It was rooted in the real daily experiences, not of poverty itself, but of the fact that you had desperately poor people and phenomenally rich people in the same town. And the thing about inequality is not just between people, it's between groups of people, families. It's not just between families, it's between regions. And it's not just between regions, it's between countries. So that's the starting point. That's the starting point. And austerity makes it worse. So austerity increases, magnifies the level and degree and extent of inequality in all aspects. There's a very good book written a few years ago called The Spirit Level about health inequality particularly. And that showed how it was getting worse. But we have to, get away from slogans or generalizations and recognize what it means for the individual. That you can't get out of your house because you've got a bad leg and that's it. And there's nothing there. Nobody is helping you. Right? When Prince Charles gets dressed in the morning, he doesn't do what the rest of us do and try and find a clean pair of socks, which I rarely succeed, I should say. I blame my son. Yeah? Someone gives him a clean pair of socks. Yeah? And if he doesn't like it, they give him another one. It's a world so different that you can't believe they're all humans with the same needs, wants, desires, futures. So it is staggering, isn't it? And of course that was brought home when that poor refugee child was drowned, found on the beach, and then the picture of Prince George. What could be more starkly unequal than a dead baby and a baby who's a multi-millionaire by birth? I don't think we should ever apologise for feeling this is terrible. And we shouldn't apologise for, and we shouldn't be defensive when selfish people say, oh, you don't understand, the world isn't like that. It's about the strong winning. It's all about me. If I don't look after myself, we shouldn't be ashamed of saying you're completely wrong. And if the world was like that, it would be even worse. And if it wasn't for people like us, it would be even worse. So that's the consequences. But the consequences are also instability. So where you have inequality, you have instability. People turn on each other. The Conservatives are very good at divide and rule, turning us against each other. Age, gender, race, ethnicity, even regions, yes? Yeah? They turn against it. Public sector against private sector. Pensioners against younger people. Everyone's turned against each other on trivial grounds. Oh, look. Oh, look. I mean, it's trivial. But they do it very well because they know that keeps us fighting each other, inward looking. It's unstable. The world is unstable. The more unequal. And that creates war. That creates huge migration of peoples. The migration of peoples isn't about their wishing to migrate. It's about the insecurity and instability that comes with grotesque inequality. And their view that this inequality cannot be resolved where they are. That it can only be resolved by moving away from where they are. So it brings all of that consequences. So then we can look, what are the causes? What causes this? Now we like to say, it's the capitalist bastards. Or we want to say, it's the bankers. But I don't say that. I don't think that's helpful. I always say the story of the scorpion and the fox when people talk about bankers having robbed us. And you know the parabellum. The scorpion needs to get across the river. And can't, obviously. So says the fox, I'll jump on your back, you saw across the river. And we both get there. The fox says, don't be stupid, you're a scorpion, you'll sting me, and I'll die. And the scorpion says, no, you're the stupid one. If I sting you when we're crossing the river, we'll both die. Halfway across, the scorpion stings the fox. The fox says, what the hell have you done? The scorpion says, it's in my nature. So for bankers to be crooks, it's in their nature. We shouldn't blame them for being bankers, right? That's not finger pointing and saying it's all you greedy bankers. It's hopeless. It's like a child's cry, right? It's in their nature. What we have to do is create structures and political controls that prevent their nature from allowing them to drown us all, not to rail against individuals within the system. So it's capitalism that's the cause. So how does it work? We have this general view. Well, it works through a very simple system of ownership. And that's the key. The key to capitalism is who owns what and why, and maybe how. So it's very simple. When we're born, I guess, unless I'm looking at any particularly rich people who came in here by mistake, you know, we don't own anything. So how on earth do we make a living? I mean, how do we actually make a living? How do we actually get money, income? But if I own land, if I'm born owning land, I can rent it out. So I get rent, that's income from the use of land. If I own a company or I own shares, I get profits, dividends from the ownership of it. Yeah? That's fine. I don't have to go to work. I have income, which I need to live. Everyone needs income. But the rest of us, the only thing we own is ourselves. I mean, the greatest change in modern history was the abolition of slavery. The abolition of slavery changes the world forever, and in Europe, serfdom. Before that, the vast majority of people don't have income. They don't go to work for income. They go to work because they're enslaved. They're not owning anything. They don't own themselves. They don't own their bodies. They don't even own their ability to labour. Somebody else does. When you liberate the slaves and liberate the serfs, suddenly you've got hundreds of millions of people running about the world saying, how do I make money? How do I earn? What have I got to sell? And the only thing they have to sell is their time and their skills. A quantity and quality of labour, and where do they sell it? In a labour market. Now, a lot of socialists have muddled about markets. They think markets and capitalism are the same. That's quite wrong. There are markets before there was capitalism, and there'll be markets after there's capitalism. Markets are just a mechanism to exchange goods and services. They can't be good or bad. They're just things. Right? This table can't be good or bad. It's a thing. Right? And therefore, it's very important that we understand that we have to sell the only thing we own to live. That's our ability to labour. And when we sell it in a market. And most of the time, there's more of us selling than people buy. And in any market, when there's more sellers than buyers, the price is low. The wages are low. And when we go to work, we add value. We make things. You know? I don't care. Every time I take my kids on the motorway, I say, remember who built the motorway? It wasn't the boss. It wasn't the politicians. It wasn't the bankers who financed it. It was ordinary men and women doing their job. They built it. And for all the others, if you didn't have all the others, they could still have built it. But one thing is, it wouldn't have been built if the workers hadn't been there. It's workers who add value, who create value. And the general proposition that's gone down the ages for at least 700 years, so it's not a Marxist idea, it predates Marxism by 400 or 500 years, is that labour creates value by their energy, their skills, their efforts. And the reward they receive, their wages, is less than the value they create. And there's a gap. And that gap we call exploitation. So the fact is, workers are exploited. Even if you earn a good wage, you can be exploited if the value that you create is higher. So skilled workers add value. They're exploited. Unskilled workers, lower skilled workers, they're exploited. Now, the reason this is such an important concept, not does it only explain inequality, it explains the nature of class. So to be working class has nothing to do with what you drink, how you speak, what you wear, or whether you go to the opera or to the pub. Nothing to do with any of those trivial, superficial things. It's to do with the fundamental question: what happens if you don't go to work? Who pays the bills? And if you don't go to work and you can't pay your bills, you're a worker. You have to go to work to pay. And that makes you working class. And the reason that's so important is it gives us common cause. It means that we have in common with each other far more than all the pretend and fake differences that are thrust upon us by so-called social or cultural norms. And it also gives us a key issue into international solidarity, because it's workers all over the world are in the same plight. Chinese workers, Russian workers, German workers, South African workers. We all have it. Doesn't matter whether you're black or white, does it? Doesn't matter whether you're a Muslim or a Christian. Doesn't matter whether you're Asian or African. Doesn't matter whether you're old or young. If you go to work, or your dependents rely on you going to work, you're working class, and you have more in common with each other than all the differences in the world. And that is the objective. It's not subjective, it's not opinion. This is the objective basis for solidarity, for collective action. And if we understand that, then we're very clear that all the things people try to divide us, turn on each other, are simply superficial and not to be regarded in a serious manner. And yet we're constantly distracted, aren't we? Constantly distracted by, oh, they're a foreigner, they're from the south, they're different colour, they're different creed, constantly. And it's deliberate so that we don't see the real exploiters. So that's, in my view, the cause. The root cause is a system of exploitation that generates and maintains inequality, and it also, in so doing, though, creates the possibility for solidarity. Now, obviously, I only have a short time to speak. Mike wrote, no, if allowed, I could speak for 7 hours without a break. I probably have. Mike and I have shared many a long cardiac, at the end of which he'd gone mad, or deaf, or both. So I can go on forever, but obviously we only have limited time. So the final build-up to this is, the point of analysis, the point of theory, is to make sure that practice isn't blind, that you're not banging our heads against the same wall all the time, that we're not. And what happens when it comes to practice? You get a lot of, if you like, misconceptions. And there was a famous, I'm sure you're aware of John Milton's Paradise Lost, the most famous piece of literature in British history, but it's political. Totally political, and it was revolutionary. What he was saying was revolutionary. What happens, if you remember, is Satan, before he's bad, is good. This is a fabulous contradiction. And he sits at the right hand of God. I mean, that's not bad. And he decides that God is incompetent. Sound familiar? And probably ineffective. And therefore he thinks he should be God. So he says to God, I'm going to be God. And the next thing he does, he wakes up in hell. That was a mistake. God hurls him, Satan, and all his mates down into hell. And they wake up and they say, where the hell are we? Not surprisingly. And they say, God, it's horrible here. It's black and it's dark and it's cold and it's vile. And they have a debate. What do we do? What is to be done? How do we get out of hell? So if we think we're in hell now, with a Tory government, think what they thought. And have this debate. And you get everything that we get. They got the impossibilists. They said, no problem, we can overthrow God tomorrow. Let's just do it. So these were called the impossibilists. And you've heard them around meetings. Come on, revolution tomorrow, let's overthrow the Tories. Easy. So that's impossibilism. Then there were the defeatists. Oh God, we've got no chance at all. What have we, what can we do? With no chance, mate. Leave it. The Tories have always been there. The rich and powerful always there. Look at those bloody multinationals. They don't even pay their tax. Let's give up. So, and anyway, they say, hell's not that bad. So you've got the defeatists and the impossibilists. And then you had the opportunists. People who said, agreed with everybody. Every attempt to escape hell, they would get there. Say, yeah, we've thought of that. We'll join your picket line. We'll join your group. They've done no work. They've given no thought. Just come mouthy onto the scene late in the day. There was a famous economist who said it's like watching a parade go by your front door. When it's nearly at the end, you bravely join in. Because you weren't prepared to join in when you thought it might be a failure. So there's the opportunists. And then there's the principled realists. People who have principles, who understand the need to deal with inequality, who understand that there are deep and important issues at stake and that there's dangers around the corner. But they're also realists. You can't build a revolutionary movement or an opposition overnight. You have to take it strategically, stage by stage. And within that, there are two important issues. One is discipline. You cannot give up every time you lose a debate. You can't just turn around and say, oh, we did our best. You've got to be disciplined. In the London mayoral election, the Labour candidate, in my view, is not a great candidate. And most of my children live in London. And they say, oh, Daddy's bloody awful. I say, I don't give a damn, you vote. You vote Labour because otherwise you let the Tories in. It's just a luxury. It's just a lazy luxury to say, I don't like that person, I'm not going to vote for them. What's the consequence? What's the real politics? It's exactly what your enemies want. Yeah? You can't be that picky if you're in a movement. You've got to be disciplined. And the discipline comes from an understanding of solidarity. That if we do stay together, unity is strength is a slogan of the union movement. I've never met a trade unionist who's ever done it. I mean, I share platforms with general secretaries. I did one a few weeks ago, one of the most famous general secretaries of the country. He gave one of the most brilliant and passionate speeches you'll ever hear about unity. I mean, breathtaking. Walked off the programme, he said, but I didn't mean unison. I mean, he said it to me as we walked off. I didn't mean unison. And you just thought of me, no, I know you didn't, mate. I know you didn't. But don't give us this stuff about solidarity and unity is strength if you're still fighting these endless battles. I know, time is running out. So the idea is, what is to be done? So the point which you all know, which is why you're here, is the, to some surprise, election of Jeremy Corbyn has changed in a lifetime perception and possibilities within the Labour Party. The Labour Party has always been a broad party of social democrats, socialists, conservatives definitely, and all sorts of rat bags, to be honest. Yeah? But it's still the main party that workers associate. Where I live in Stoke, they did a famous thing. They went round to, after one of the elections, and there was this old lady there, and she said, I said, why are you voting Labour? And she just looked in amazement. She said, this is Stoke. She walked off. Yeah, that was it. She knew you voted Labour. Right? Didn't matter who the candidate was, didn't matter how awful the leadership was. You vote Labour because if you don't, the Tories get in. But this time round, we have Corbyn. A complete, once-in-a-generation, life-changing election. And behind Corbyn, therefore, is the opportunity to move the Labour Party's policies to the left with John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor. But they need, and they've made it absolutely clear, they need help beyond the parliamentary party. The parliamentary party is a viper's nest. They won't win with it, they won't get far. And therefore, they are relying on the trade union movement, on demonstrations, on fights for injustice, and on momentum to deliver it. So what is to be done is what you're doing. But it has to be consistent. It can't be for today. I know Corbyn. He's a strategic thinker. I don't know, it's sometimes rude to use footballing analogies, but Brazil, when they were a good team, lost all their friendlies because they were preparing for the World Cup. And Corbyn's like that. He's preparing for the next general election. He may lose some of the things on the way. He may not get it all right, but he's preparing for the general election. He's got a strategic view of how to move the policy forward and how to meet people behind him with that policy forward. And all our job is, and we all know that, that's why we're here, we've got to get behind him 100%. He's going to make mistakes. He's going to make misjudgments. He's going to misspeak, as some of his front bench will. But that doesn't matter. We have to be there, we have to be disciplined, we have to be solid, and we have to be active. And this is a chance, and I absolutely believe he can win the next election. Yes. Absolutely believe it. Okay, Rachel has pointed out I've overrun as usual, so I apologise for that, but I'm very happy to take questions.